In Ontario, if a tenant doesn't or is unable to pay rent and the landlord-tenant board grants an eviction for that reason, neither the board nor the landlord enforces it, but rather a specific procedure needs to be followed, which starts with the LTB issuing what's called a standard order.
A standard order provides that for 10 days you have to pay up all the arrears owing.
Monica Moran-Venegas from Kensington Bellwoods Community Legal Services explains that if the tenant is able to pay the entire amount within 10 days, they can file for what's called a tenant's motion to set aside with the LTB.
Make sure that when you do pay, ideally you get proof of payment. Contact your community legal clinic. We can help you with filing these set-aside motions. It's important to get the paperwork in. Do not just pay the money and think that everything's fine.
If the tenant cannot pay by the 10-day deadline, the landlord must file with the court enforcement office and the sheriff then carries out the eviction.
They send you a notice, generally speaking by mail, and they tell you when they're coming. The sheriff comes. They're not a moving company. Their job is strictly to make sure that you're physically out of the unit. You've turned over your keys.
Thereafter, the landlord must provide the tenant with reasonable access to the unit for another 72 hours.
You can come in, get anything that might be remaining, and then from those 72 hours, that's when the eviction has completely happened.
Aside from circumstances which might mean a tenant is unable to pay rent, Moran-Venegas says tenants should not deliberately withhold rent for any reason.
And this can be confusing situations for people because of things like, well, if my unit is flooded and I can't use it, what am I paying for?
But as per the Residential Tenancies Act, that's not reason enough to stop paying rent. There's only one scenario in the RTA that allows a tenant to temporarily suspend rent payments.
The standard form lease, it's the lease that everyone should be using. If you have an agreement, you've moved in, and the landlord still hasn't provided you with a signed copy, you have to request it in writing. 21 days after you've made that request, if the landlord still hasn't provided you with the signed copy of the rental agreement, your obligation to pay rent has been suspended.
That suspension does not mean that the tenant no longer owes the rent. Once a signed copy of the lease is provided, a landlord can ask for back rent, so it's best to set it aside. For City News, I'm Dilshad Burman.